Yeah, so this is going to be episode 3. We're going to be talking about gods and the different pantheons and how you can incorporate them into your game today. We're not really going to talk about building the pantheon. I think that's going to be a focus for another time because I think we could have at least a 1 to 2 hour conversation about it.
Definitely.
But I'm your host, Wyatt, and this is going to be our first time having a guest star. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cameron Perkins. Over the course of I've played D&D for a little over 9 years. Since I was 13. Actually before I was 13. I started shortly before I turned 13, and I just turned 21. So a little over 9 years, I think.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's how time works.
I think so.
A little over 9 years now. And I have run in that time, I'd say somewhere between 15 and 20 games.
Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad.
My longest running one is the first game I ever actually ran, which is still running now. We're approaching 9 years on one on-running game. Hit level 13.
Oh my god! How much XP have you been giving them?
I don't do XP. I do max.
Okay, so you're not like torturing them and making them just sit there and talk to each other for 7 hours.
No, I'm not.
Okay. At least
I'm not that player. I'm not the DM.
I actually like the XP system a lot, so that's what I usually go with.
It's not bad. It needs a rebalance. That's
Definitely
a topic for another episode.
Very true. So we'll start off our kind of discussion today with a very fundamental idea of when you're talking about the pantheon. And that comes down to whether you want to actually have your gods involved in the plot or whether you're kind of having them just as neutral observers. And I think both are pretty valid. And I would say the only way to really run a game is to kind of have a little bit of both.
I would say the level, you're right. And I would say that it's kind of hard to argue with that opinion. I would add on the level of involvement they have kind of depends on the exact story and campaign you're running. Because, for example, right now I'm running a campaign which is sort of like a survival-based sort of campaign. Survival and, foraging and colony building, actually, like city building. They're literally, I have made a system for them to build a city. And they, gods aren't really going to be that involved in that, obviously. But if you're running a campaign where it's the world's at danger because some existential threat is happening, they're going to be a lot more involved. So
So I agree with your statement, but I think it kind of also depends on the individual god we're talking about.
That's also true.
Because I think a big part of it is going to be your gods. I really like how Forgotten Realms does it. Ao, the creator of the universe, he could give a flying hell less what happens.
But,
he does not care. He just is sitting back watching for entertainment purposes.
The only time AO cares is when something happens that screws with what he wants, which is honestly valid, but also he's kind of selfish because he at one point he decided, hey, gods, all of you, you're not gods anymore. Just set them down to the mortal plane. I think it's the Times of Trouble or whatever. Which real quick, I love the fact in that Times of Trouble thing, the one god he didn't strip of his power was Helm, who was the god of guardians and defenders, and the reason is because he put him at the door of heaven and said, "Let nobody in."
Yeah.
And then Maestro tried to get in, and he murdered.
Yeah, and then there's your characters what would be a good one? Tyrion. Tyrion's pretty involved. Tyrion likes to be very hands-on because he's trying to be
the god of strength and battle and stuff, right?
Yeah, so he'll imbue people
Justice,
with
whatever.
No, he's war and evil if I remember correctly.
Is he? Hold on.
Who's the one that's evil? I can't remember. Evil and war. I can't remember. I thought it starts with a T.
Tempest?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. He's greater god of war. He deals with honorable combat. Yeah, he's the god of honorable combat and battle.
But he's a lot more involved because if you were to put on a spectacular battle, he will actually imbue you with power after sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, that god, it makes sense for him to be very hands-on in your story. But I try to actually avoid those characters because, I mean, it's so much less fun to have to pretend to be a god versus a common person, in my opinion.
When you're that's a thing. That's actually a topic to talk about because like the DM trying to play a god is so it's hard to get into a mentality of a god because you have to think about it in the way of like this thing isn't human or even remotely close. This is a wildly supernatural entity that is just kind of like human-ish, or like I say human-ish, mortal-ish, because it is shaped through mortals to varying degrees depending on the world. But like that, you're right. It is hard to play and kind of annoying to play a god.
And that's why I kind of try to avoid it for my game. Is it's very much, I have not found an effective way to really kind of give off the presence that you need to for a god, to the point where I can actually like convince my players, hey, this is a great like higher being, and make it really immersive situation. It's a lot easier to be the king of the country as the DM and like speak as a king and versus a god, where it's like it's kind of challenging, especially with like, I love to say that we are super creative and we can be as creative as we want, but even between the Abrahamic religions and the outsourced religions, when gods give premonitions, they're usually depicted the same ways, to the point where it's very, very challenging to do much with them.
Yeah, it's like it's I mean, it's the stereotype. It's even a D&D stereotype where it's like a god sends a dream. Like it's cool. It's objectively pretty cool, but also like it's played out. It's done so much that it's kind of hard to do well.
Yeah, and like as a DM, it's trying to create something from scratch for that is just so challenging that I personally steer clear.
I've always I do use gods. I use gods only when the plot calls for it. A player does something that would get their attention, or a player's whole character revolves around one, or like has one that like incorporates into their story. I kind of play with like a minimize the interaction of gods as much as possible. The minimal number of gods you can get away with is the number you should use.
And I think that's really true when you're talking about like how many should be affecting the party, is as few as possible. That being said, I have a world where I'm doing completely custom lore that's built around the dragon gods, Bahamut, Tiamat, Io, who came before them, and I'm completely rewriting my own story. And in that story, I use Bahamut and Tiamat a lot. That being said, the party interacting with them is going to be very sparing because of the fact that in the world that I'm writing, they govern over everything. They're not going to have time to handle and talk to 4 to 6 mortals.
Unless those mortals do something absolutely insane or incredible.
Or they're like actually actively helping them and they just say thank you and then they ignore them for the rest of existence. Like, yeah. It's like, going to be a quick, hi, here's your medal, go away.
To be fair, a god's medal is like, hey, you're immortal now. Like, that's gods are like, that's very much, it's the epic boons system where like players hit level 20 and then you as the DM are supposed to be like, hey, the rewards now after you've hit level 20 are like a god makes it so you don't age.
Yeah.
Because they can do that.
I don't actually like that system very much at all.
It's not good.
It's not very fun to play. I'm not going to lie to you.
I have given out epic boons once, ever.
I actually
and it was a home.
I rewrote epic boons completely. Past level 20 for me, it's like once you're past level 20, we're just gonna run the game and I'm gonna give you XP and we're gonna create new fun things for you to be able to do. We're not gonna it's not a great system in my opinion, but I really don't like the idea in D&D specifically of every single god speaking from this higher astral plane and they're speaking down on. I don't really like that. I
Oh
like
yeah.
the idea. Oh, you want to talk?
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, you could probably see it through the vid
Yeah.
chat right now, but like okay, there's a god in okay, I'm gonna bring up an entirely different system. There's a god in Pathfinder, like the default Pathfinder world, I forget what it's called, where I forget like the dude's name. I can look him up if you want, but the whole deal with him is he's a god of like luck or something. Hold on, give me a second. Hold on.
You got time.
Hayden Hylian is one of the ascended, those who have achieved godhood by passing tests in the Starstone. He's also known as the lucky drunk, drunken hero, or the accidental god.
Okay. I like the
He's,
term accidental god. That's a
he's
good
the
one.
god of freedom, ale, wine, and bravery. His whole deal is he was a dude who was like an adventurer and like a really successful one and all this stuff, but he was also a drunk and people really didn't like him. So they pushed him into this giant magic super maze that if you complete it, the myth of it is like if you complete the maze, you become a god. And he disappeared and everyone thought he was dead. And then he shows up and he's a god.
Okay. I like it.
And he's literally in the lore. Like I could read through his whole wiki page right now, but I read through it once with one of my buddies. In the lore, he's like one of the few gods who actually gives a shit personally about every single one of his worshippers, because he's like, listen dude, I was a human like 200 years ago.
And I like those characters a lot better than the upper plane, I'll call them. I don't like AO personally. I don't use him very often at all. But like I love I was an adventurer. I hit level 20 and I slaughtered a dragon and bathed in its blood and then I stopped aging. That's just I don't know what to say about that. It's so much more immersive than the I've
Like
always been.
I love that because it's like not even just gods, because that's the thing is God for me is a loose term because I actually God can mean different entities in at least in my opinion and like in my world, because there's like divine gods and then there's like elemental gods and then there's infernal gods, abyssal gods, etc. So like an archdevil is an infernal god, etc. So all of them are like none of them are better or worse, they're just different.
Archdevils to me, and this is a hot take, I would say archdevils and Feylords, it kind of depends, but I would almost say that they're not deities, and I don't classify them as deities. And the reason I don't do that is for my own sanity. I like having organization personally, and it's a lot easier for me to have. I know they're all supposed to be evil, but I like the idea of having a lawful good archdevil. I think that's fun. And then you have like almost these different pantheons. And so to me, I would say that you have these upper deities that created everything and they live on the astral plane and govern from there. Everybody else is attached to a plane. So if you're in the infernal plane, you're going to worship the archdevils as your gods. Yeah. And I think that's more interesting.
Yeah, it's like what gods matter to you really depends who you are and where you live. Like they're like the elemental planes have people living in them. Even in Forgotten Realms, in my homebrew world, maybe in yours, and like even in Forgotten Realms and like the Pathfinder stuff, there's people living in like the plane of fire, which is just fire. There's people living in it in like cities and shit. And that's really cool. And those people obviously would worship like an elemental god or like a god of fire more because of course they do. It's really cool. I will say one thing that you mentioned, which I think is kind of important for me to say because it is a hot take I have. I don't give higher entities alignments.
Okay.
I don't give gods, archdevils, etc. I don't give them alignments. I never do. I don't like it.
Why not?
it's okay. I'll use gods as an example because they're easier, or kind of easier. And once you have that, you can kind of see how it'll extend off. Like, take for example, a god of peace. Okay, let's just say god of peace.
Okay.
A god of peace obviously wants peace. Their domain is what they are. Their power and their domain is the essence of what type of entity they are. They are, in my opinion, equally as likely to, like, say, like, forgive this criminal, like, for their crimes, as they are to say this criminal's death will prevent a war, so there is more peace from their death than there is that they would get. Like, a god's reaction or a higher entity's reaction in any situation depends on who they are. Like, if we're going Forgotten Realms, Gratz, whatever, the demon,
Yeah.
the demon lord of, like, lust and stuff, lust and hedonism and etc. In any situation, will always do the hedonistic option.
Yeah.
And that is the thing, is like the hedonistic option might be, because if the hedonistic option might be chaotic evil, and probably a majority of the time is some sort of evil alignment. But there also might be an argument to be made that, like, sometimes, who's to say Gratz doesn't do good things in excess, because why not?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the thing, is Gratz hedonism isn't one thing. It's like excess in general, essentially. It's like living and sensation and all that. Like, making someone happy is a sensation, because, like, you can feel that. You can, like, feel like, oh, I made him happy. It's like it's an emotion and all that. Depends on, like, the mood. Or, like, a god of war. This is another example I'd used with a friend the other day ago. A god of war is equally likely to want a war to continue as they are to want a war to stop, so that both sides can recover and start another war later.
Yes.
Like, a god of war might one day send, like, a prophecy or a vision or something to their clerics saying, like, the war's over, stop the war, do everything you can to stop the war, because both sides are getting too devastated, and that means I won't get another war.
Yeah.
I want more wars.
And I would say that's a really good take. I do assign alignment, but I assign alignment for a very different reason. So mine has to do with, and if you were to, like, for example, for people who are listening, if you check out our Patreon, we went through and made an article completely on alignment and giving better descriptions than the books, because the books' descriptions, I think everyone can agree on, are terrible. We got a single sentence for every single one. So we went through and sat down as a group and made alignment descriptions and advice on running the alignments. And for me, alignments are based on intentions, not actions. So I will inherently give all of my gods that I intend to use an alignment, and then I actually sort my DM binder when I'm in my gods portion. I sort it by alignment, and then I highlight the portion of the plane that they're on, so that I can keep a better organizational method. Because if I'm looking for a god to be worshipped by this group of clerics that is evil, I want to be able to say, okay, let's flip to the evil portion, let's look at chaotic, let's look at lawful, and then I'm gonna dig through and look through everybody and see what's gonna fit my narrative better. That's how I like to keep myself organized. So that's why I do attach that alignment, because inherently some gods, you can have a god of war who is good because they are the patron of noble combat, and you can have a god that is the god of destruction and war that is chaotic evil. And so I would say that it helps me keep organized a little bit better.
Yeah, that's fair. You can have gods that are different aspects of the same things. It's like, and that's the thing, it's like, the more, if you have a god who their entire portfolio is god of war, that is all of war. That is their one thing. That is, they are encompassing war, good, bad, etc. But if you have a god who's like the god of war and honor, and then that is like, obviously that god is going to want, like, honorable war. And then because that's like such a specific thing, then you can have another god that's like war and cowardice or something like that. Like the more domains you give a god, the more specific their domain gets.
I would say
It's weird because it both gets more general and more specific.
I think more specific domains have a greater place within the entirety of D&D because we need to go back and build, and it gives us this aspect as a DM to role play better. When you have a specific god, if they are the god of honorable combat, they're going to want to see one-on-one fights. They're going to be more hands-on. They're going to be more controlling, especially if they're stuck on the mortal realm or they're like a human that has been promoted or an elf that has been promoted to a god. They're going to want to go in and be like, during these wars, they're going to want to be a general on the front line and pretend to be a human and be like, I want to see you for a duel. And it's like, it's so much more fun and gives you more storytelling perspectives.
Pull a steel dragon and just a god of honorable combat role playing as some random soldier.
Yeah.
I love, okay, totally off topic. Steel dragons cosplaying as normal people, amazing.
Yeah.
In fact, the idea of gods doing that, I love it.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
A god of agriculture who's just, or god or goddess of agriculture who's just owns a farm somewhere.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, after their appointed godhood, the local land becomes incredibly prosperous for no reason, and they're just like chilling there, hiding their existence. I think that is so funny and adds a mystery session, a mystery part where they're going to be like, man, this area has really great crop growth, but it hasn't rained in 4 years. I wonder why that is.
Did someone make a deal with a devil? And then meanwhile, old lady Jacinda on the sidelines just sitting there going, none of them know that I'm just the goddess of agriculture.
And it works a lot better. I think that works a lot better for a DM perspective.
Yeah. When you're doing gods, you kind of have to pick a lane, not like a total lane, like for not. It doesn't have to be all encompassing, but for every single god, you kind of have to pick: are they more human or are they more inhuman? Because you gotta pick one. Because you can't trying to do both. It's possible. It's not easy. And you kind of have to pick one to be like their main vibe, and then you can have moments where it shows other things. Like, for example, my homebrew world, I like the idea of like original gods and then like later gods that popped up. So I separate it into primordials, and primordials are like gods that just existed. Like, they are the gods from the creation myth. They are the gods. They are like the AO. They are the IO or whatever the big dragon god is that in your world. Okay. They are those people. And those ones I make utterly inhuman. Like, they might, if there's some reason one of them would pay attention to you, manifest like an avatar and speak to you. But the whole time they do, I do my very best to give an undertone vibe of this is a very strange thing talking to you.
Yeah.
This is something that you reasonably shouldn't be talking to, because if you knew in any small portion anything about the true nature of this being, you would be immediately insane.
Yeah.
It's like eldritch horror vibes. And I do that. But then for like smaller gods, like smaller gods, I make them pretty human. Like, because actually I won't say that. I make them as human as their domain is.
Okay.
Because that is something that is also should be said, is like how human a god is really should depend on their like what they are god of. Like, a god of love, deeply mortal, like in nature.
I would disagree, actually. I would say,
really?
Because for me, unless you're like the god of some incredibly inhuman thing, like if you're a god of nature and specifically of a specific area, you're going to be incredibly human. You can be incredibly human. And like even things that are very like, you can become the god of fishing by being a fisherman your whole life and becoming a like. There are ways to do it where I would say the domain, unless you're like the god of suffering.
What about here's something I'll ask you. What about gods who are like the god of storms, like the god of a natural phenomenon that is ancient and deeply like disconnected?
So for me, there's if I was to be writing a here, I'm gonna use a different example than storm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna use time.
Okay.
Because time is a very important one.
I just finished making the god of time for my homebrew world.
So in my homebrews, I usually run multiple gods of time. And what's important to me about it is when I'm writing a god of time, it depends on how I'm using them, which route I take. Either A, they have always been, and they're a part of this kind of council that keeps everything organized. Think, have you seen the show Loki? Think kind of like the Time Syndicate, whatever they call it.
The TVA, I
TVA,
think.
yeah.
Time Variance Authority, yeah.
Or the other option is a level 20 chronomancer wizard who is enlightened and becomes a god. That character is going to be incredibly human, even though they control literally nature itself, because they were human. And you don't fully get warped when you become a god unless you've existed for millennia. And realistically, I don't play with that.
Okay, this is a fun thing. My home game is still going on, but we've reached the point in the campaign where we can kind of see the end coming. And so it's kind of gotten to a point where like all the players have already written for me their like character epilogues. None of those really matter, except for one, which is one of the characters, Rakoni, where her whole deal is that after the campaign's wrapped up, they defeat the big bad evil guy, etc. She goes off and starts like an organization whose whole deal is like kind of helping people, but it's more like, like bringing her idea of justice. She essentially becomes like the founder of like a knight order.
Okay.
And part of what I've discussed with her as the epilogue is that after her character dies, it's sort of like those ideas carry on, and eventually, posthumously, her character ascends to godhood because those ideas take root as a religious ideology.
Okay. I don't mind it. I don't mind that take. For me, it's rewarding when you see a character fully ascend to godhood. As an epilogue, especially if you hit level 20. And I would say, especially for casters, that's very important. I think that's very crucial.
I don't limit it to just casters, but yeah, she is a god. I have the campaign that I'm running, right now. That's not my home one. It takes place in the future of that world where it's past the point where she has become a god.
Mm-hmm.
She has been a god in lore for maybe 20 years. That's the thing is like, if someone were to speak to her, it's literally just her character with god powers, because it has been 20 years. She is just her with some god powers. And so it's like, her character is a barbarian. Barbarian with 16 intelligence because she rolled really high on stats. But her character is just a barbarian who eventually becomes a god because like religious ideology and all that stuff. It's like if someone were to talk to her, she would be like very little social graces and would just be like, look, just do what I tell you.
Yeah. And I think for me with this whole ideology behind it, I would say it's very important to know what kind of god you're talking to. Are you talking to something that is ancient, or are you talking to something that is relatively young? And when you're creating gods, I like it when characters become gods at the epilogue. I tend to avoid doing it with holy casters because they're worshipping something else. If you are worshipping, for example, a warlock, worshipping a patron, you are not going to ascend to godhood.
No, you are not.
But
you might ascend to whatever that entity makes you.
Yeah, you might become an eldritch horror for the rest of existence, but you're not going to become this beautiful eternal being. That's
Mhm.
just out of the cards for you. But if you're a sorcerer that hits level 20 and has wish, you're probably going to end up as a deity of some kind. Like you,
Wish can't. Maybe a hot take. Wish can't make someone a deity. It can't.
yeah, it can't, but like it can grant you a presence with a deity. You can wish to speak to a
You can
god.
wish to talk to a deity.
And if you do
Um,
that, the chance that they, especially a greater deity, if you've been following them, there's a chance they might give you lesser godhood, and then I think it would almost be really funny that you become the god's assistant for eternity.
that's something that's fun to mention. Is I love the idea of gods granting. Okay, so Riconi, back to her. She becomes the goddess of recompense and reconciliation. So essentially, it's you know, like like recompense and reconciliation. It's like forgiveness, kind of, and you know, getting what you deserve. So the joke is that she's a god of karma. She is in the like world lore a lesser deity who serves under the god of law and order, or the god of law. And so it's like a weird thing where like gods can have lesser gods that are like sub parts of their, and they are like the boss of that god.
Okay.
It's
When I'm
wording this badly.
okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
And this has to do with how I make gods. I
Okay.
make gods on a character sheet because I find that incredibly enjoyable.
Interesting.
But what I do, and this is similar to how I do the big bads for my campaigns. The
Mhm.
big bads I do for my campaigns, I do a little differently than I do gods. So when I do a big bad for my campaign, I will take 3 to 4 d12s and roll rather than d6s because it gives me the chance to have much higher stats and much lower stats. But with a god, I'll roll like 66s and I'll drop the lowest 1 or 2.
Yeah. I don't stat deities
Okay.
or higher entities at all. I just don't. If you ever play in a game, because we do know each other, if you ever
Yeah.
play the game with me and there is any sort of like archdevil, fey lord, or etc., just a tip. I've probably not statted it because the answer to can you fight it is probably no.
See, for me, the answer is always yes. Can you fight it? Go ahead. Have fun.
Yeah. The answer, actually, yeah, you're right. The answer to can you fight it is yes. The answer to will you win is no.
For me, it's like, can I fight it? Yes. Awesome. So this character, behind the DM screen, they're a paladin. They smite you for 49 damage. What the fuck is that thing? That's how I tend to like to run it.
Yeah, it's like I once had a player smack the god of chaos in my homebrew world in one of the campaigns that I ran that was like kind of like higher scale.
Yeah.
And the god of chaos like had an avatar and they just slapped across the face. And the thing is, I had to make a quick moment decision of this is a deity. Does that deity care? Because they had a negative strength modifier, so it would do 1 damage maximum, but it's an avatar, so it's immune to non-magic damage. And it was I forget what class they were, but they weren't a monk, so a slap is not magical, so it didn't do anything.
Okay.
And so I just had the god of chaos be like, why?
Why? What did you do?
Like they just laughed and were like, that's adorable. I don't know why you're doing that though. It's kind of I don't know. I had a point and I lost it.
There's a reason that I fully fill out a character sheet for deities.
Yeah.
And that reason is if a player decides they want to lie to a god.
They know. No.
They do, but it depends on what kind of deity that it is.
That's also true.
If it's AO, I'm just going to be like, no, AO's the creator of all things. I don't bother to stat him. But if it's like, for example, the guy from the Forgotten Realms, I'm going to stat him out. And I like to do it as a character sheet because for me, it gives me so many more modifiers that I can actually physically look at and pull up QuickTime and not have to do mental math. That it's a lot easier for me. And if you're going to try to lie to a god, I think me rolling 66s and dropping the lowest 1 to 2 is a pretty good way to bump those stats quite a bit, where it's going to be pretty hard to lie to them. And obviously it depends on age, but I just add d6s for age relative to what I think is acceptable. Versus my final bosses where I'll literally roll 4 d12s and make it like it's a character.
Yeah.
Because I personally have mostly played casters in my D&D career. I've played a cleric, I've played way too many wizards, way too many sorcerers, and a couple warlocks. I'm gonna make that a magic caster, like a lich. I'm gonna roll 3 d12s, and you best believe if I roll 3 12s, that's all going in my magic stat, and you're not gonna
intelligence. God, intelligence of 36 is insane.
Yeah, that's like the final bosses usually for me.
That is, I mean, to be fair, that's fair. A BBAG should be kind of ridiculous. Well, kind of depending on the campaign, but
yeah.
I don't stat gods just because I've had players before. I have had player horror stories before, and like one of the main reasons I don't stat gods because I've had players who have like min-maxed before and they deal 300 damage in a turn. I can kill a god, and I was like, if I stat a god, someone's gonna do some bullshit.
See, for me, I encourage it because you best hit. Like it's that mentality of like, if you're gonna take a swing, it better be a good one. Because if it's not a good one, you're donezo.
To be fair, I also run what is a fairly dark world.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because everything's kind of shitty and everyone's kind of dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like using them for combat. I think even having an evil god as like the final big bad for a campaign can be a lot of fun. And I'm not gonna lie to you, for me, the final fight, everyone is so freaked out about having these gorgeous epilogues for the characters. I don't mind TPKing is my last thing. You go to kill this big bad god who's corrupting the world and he slaughters the whole party and the world falls into ruin. That's just as satisfying of an end to me as a happy one. And that's just a personal preference.
I would say, and this kind of feels like it's getting on like plot beats, which might be a topic for another.
Yeah, we're gonna go through plot later.
But like, I say it depends on the players whether or not that is a satisfying ending. Because I, as a DM, am satisfied with whatever happens. If my players TPK, great. I'm happy. Whatever. We move on. I have a million other campaign ideas. But like, it's up to them. Like, if the player doesn't want their character to die, I'll find a way to bring the character back. If a player, as long as it's remotely possible. If a player, or like they're not asking for anything absurd. If a player, like if we got to the final fight of the campaign and they all died, and then like they all died, and all the players were like, "Well, we tried," and they were all cool with it, I would be like, "Cool," and then we would start a new campaign, move on. I'd probably, I wouldn't retcon the whole campaign, but I'd probably like retcon the ending or something if I wanted to run in the same world again, or I'd just say new timeline, none of it ever happened. Whatever. But
see,
that's if I wanted to run in the same world.
I am diabolical. I'm very diabolical because my last campaign where I actually had the party get TPK.
Okay. On purpose, or did it just happen?
At the end, they just couldn't beat the final boss.
Okay.
we resurrected and we started playing the final boss resurrected them because he was a god, and they started playing from the evil side.
That's fun.
Which was actually a lot of fun. And my characters loved it because all of these characters they had grown bonds with in the cities and stuff were now fighting against them.
See, that's fun. That's the kind of thing of like, I would talk about players, and that might be an idea I would give them is like, this is a lich. There's like a 60% chance he's going to bring y'all back to life.
Yeah, and let's just go back to war. But this time we're going to war with the mortals. And then you get a nice evil campaign that feels very satisfying.
And then here's the thing. Maybe all of them then lose against the other good guys. And then the world resurrect them again. And then the world ends up like being like saved in the end.
Yeah, who knows? Or they break the magic and the party gets to turn on the lich when he thinks they're on their side.
Yeah, like that's the kind of thing. Like you kind of, if they died and all the players were like, "Cool, let's move on," I would just end there, move on. But like, if they want to keep going with these characters and stuff, we'll find a way. We'll find.
And it can be a lot of fun,
especially when you have like gods and shit. Like, okay. If you ever speak to any of my players, tell them none of this. And
okay.
If any of my players that are in my current campaign, the colony one, ever listen to this,
click off.
Jump forward like 3 minutes. So one of the players, it hasn't happened yet, but they have discussed with me pre the game that they want their character to have a religious awakening.
Okay.
They want their character to take levels in cleric after being exposed to a certain religion that currently they and I are building together.
Okay.
So I'm letting them partake in the whole building the god. Like they're coming up, they're helping build their own god. They're helping build their own religion, etc. And because the pantheon's unfinished, so I'm pretty cool with that. So. If, say, like, got to the very final battle and, like, you know, a whole party dies, if that character were to, like, be... If that character might be the way, like, if everyone wanted to keep going, I, fixed that to happen.
Yeah.
Because they are going to, at least... So I like to discuss like long-term ideas with players really early.
Okay.
And what I've discussed with them is like becoming like what essentially amounts to like a saint of this religion.
Okay.
And so that would be like a really interesting like plot point is like that's part of their saint myth is like they died and then crawled back from hell or something like that. Like because their god is going to be a brutal god.
Yeah,
their god is going to be a god that is like rather brutal and unforgiving. So it would be the kind of thing of like all the players die, and then in the like afterlife, that player like begs their god for a chance, and we have like a whole like couple sessions where the god's like, "All right, you want me to bring you back to life? I will. Prove you're worth it." And then we have whole couple sessions where literally they're just like fighting, like doing trials or some shit to prove to this god that they deserve to come back to life. And then if they complete it, and honestly, I would make it so that not the whole party could complete it. Like if there's 7 people in that game, I'm running a campaign with 7 people. If 5 of them pass the trials and 2 don't,
2 are dead.
Sorry, the god is not going to give you a second chance.
But they could be resurrected somewhere else as long as someone gets out.
One of the party members could do it.
Yeah. You're as long as someone gets back from the dead, as long as you got 500 gold pieces in your pocket, anything is possible. I swear.
And then like they all wake up and it's been like 2 seconds since they died. Like that sort of thing. Gods are really useful, but they're also really annoying sometimes, which is a really weird dichotomy.
Yeah, I think it's very important to plan them and execute properly without overusing. And I think that's the big topic: is don't overuse them. And I personally, I personally don't like some of Forgotten Realms. I really dislike the concept that if enough people worship one thing, it becomes a god. Where if you step on this specific frog creature, I don't remember what it is, it
Kuatoa.
creates and it creates a god of your foot. I don't like that. I don't like it at all.
Kuatoa, that's the whole thing, is in Forgotten Realms, the belief of every creature has power and can create deities. Kuatoa have more power per Kuatoa than per average mortal. So it takes far less Kuatoa to make a god than it does other mortals.
Yep.
Which is interesting because it can lead to some really weird things, because Kuatoa are also extremely religious
and dumb,
and they want a god to worship. They if you've played Baldur's Gate 3, there is a Kuatoa. This is a spoiler. Anyone who hasn't played Baldur's Gate 3, stop listening. Jump forward like 5 minutes. Not 5 minutes, like 2. But there's a Kuatoa town in that game. Have you found it?
I haven't played Baldur's Gate at all.
Okay. Do you want me to?
I don't mind. I don't intend to play the game.
Oh, okay.
Not that I don't enjoy the game. It's I want to run D&D, and I don't have time to run the campaigns I want to run and play Baldur's Gate. I will get sucked in. So I'm gonna keep my head forward on D&D until the time where I have more free time, and then I'll do it.
Yeah, that's fair. So there's a Kuatoa town in there where they are worshiping Bahul or something like that. They pronounce it weird, but it's supposed to be like a ripoff of Baal, who is the Forgotten Realms god of murder.
Okay.
Murder and strife, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
And so this god who's like Bahul or whatever, who they're worshiping, who's just like this weird, like little blood creature, turns out to just be a red cap, which is a fae, who convinced a bunch of Kuatoa they were a god. And so this red cap, because that's the thing, is Kuatoa make gods, but they don't make like real gods.
Yeah.
Because their gods don't become. That's the difference. Is like mortals, it takes a lot more of them to make a god, and over a long period of time. But they make like a real quote unquote god. Kuatoa, if they stop believing, their god fizzles into nothing. They need the Kuatoa to keep believing, or else they literally just disappear. Yep. Unless they were something alive before, and then they just go back to what they were. And so you playing the game can make a check to realize this is just a fae who is deceiving a bunch of Kuatoa. And then if you do that, you can just murder it. It is much tougher than the average red cap, though, because it has a power buff from a village of Kuatoa. And so it's a really cool thing where like you get to see some small aspect of like how gods get made in Forgotten Realms. And in a lot of other worlds use the same system of like belief makes a god. I even use it. Because that's kind of, it's easy. It also makes sense.
I use a modified version. And the reason that I use a modified version is because I don't like this concept that you poof into being all of a sudden when you have 100 people believing in you. You have to be a living thing beforehand. That is my rule with young gods, is you had to have had a life beforehand. You may not remember that life, but you had a life. Because then all of the legendary heroes in your world, there's a reason to be a legendary hero. You could die and go to the quote-unquote heaven, or you could become an immortal god. Like, that gives more power for the players, for your NPCs to strive towards. It gives them purpose. And that's my belief.
Yeah, that's very true. Because, like, if players know that becoming a god is a possible epilogue, a lot of players will be like, oh, that sounds difficult. There's the occasional player who hears that and goes, how? And you're like,
today's the day.
And then there's two versions of that player. There's the power gamer who's hoping you'll let them become a god in game and then use those powers in game, which no, never. Or there's like the story, like the role player, story player, who wants to literally build a character where the whole purpose of that character is to eventually end up a god in like the world lore, which is Riconi.
I actually, believe it or not, that's the cleric that I played. Was their entire goal was to become a god and a lawful good god of peace and tranquility, and they were doing it through raising a zombie army to stomp out all wars.
That's not a lawful good.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It was a interesting character to play.
That is a person with a very demented sense of good.
Yes, it was, and that was the whole point. Was
that person is going to end up being something that is very much not a god that is good.
No, their goal was to create world peace and become a god of peace through
murder.
Yeah, basically through using corpses to stop all war without having death.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
it was an interesting character. It was a fun one to play.
Yeah, that is. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, just ignore it.
That is an interesting character. Here's the thing. You talking about the characters you've played makes me a little bit angry because I have only ever played 2 characters because I've only ever been a player twice. I am a forever DM and I'm stuck as that. To be fair, I love DMing. I have control issues, but both times I've been a player, the DM has at some point told me stop telling players rules when they ask what the rule is before I can tell them the rule. I can't really turn it off. I'm one of those people who can't really turn it off, so I'm better being a DM.
See, for me, I've played both. I am mostly a DM. I've DM'd more games than I've played.
Mm-hmm.
But the games I've played, because I have DM'd so much, if I'm gonna play a game, I'm not gonna do your normal Joe Schmo. I'm gonna mess with your head. I'm gonna play that character that you're sitting there and you're like, for that one, my whole goal was to make the rest of the party question, is this really good anymore?
Yeah. I played, and actually, this does connect to the God topic.
Yeah.
I played, both characters I've ever played have both been very religious.
Really?
The first character I ever played was a paladin. He was a paladin of Helm in the Forgotten Realms, actually, which is Helm is my favorite god in the Forgotten Realms. Helm, to be fair, it's kind of easy for Helm to be the favorite god because most Forgotten Realm gods are bad people. Looks at Mystra actively telling someone to commit suicide in Baldur's Gate 3. Mystra's a bad person. And deserved to be smited by Helm. Hot take. But was that a cough or you telling me to
that was me coughing. That was me coughing. I'm sorry.
I thought that was like a cough.
No, you're all good.
Okay, cool. All right. So that DM actually had an interesting thing because I had to leave that campaign. Actually, that campaign started to fall apart because of some interpersonal issues. But the DM told me at one point what his plans for the character was, because the whole thing was it was an ASMR paladin and named Samuel Mundus, which literally translates to Samuel Normal. Mundus is Latin or something for normal or mundane. And apparently, I didn't know this, but in Forgotten, this is something that you will actually find interesting because it connects back to you're talking about us talking about the domain of a god shapes who they are, and also gods should be human. So I didn't know this. Apparently, in some Forgotten Realms lore or something, Helm was at one point in love with the goddess of practicality, or goddess of pragmatism or something. And at least this is what I was told. This might have been the lore my DM made up. So ASMR all are descended from some celestial, And the running, what he told me is that eventually, if that campaign had kept going on, it would have come out that the reason, because there was a running joke, because Samuel always rolled super high. Like, always. I rolled like below a 10 like twice in like a campaign we had like 30 sessions. But it became a running joke. At one point, the DM gave me his dice and said, "Roll these," and I rolled 2 natural 20s in a row, and he just went, "It's just luck." But
you were bestowed by the gods.
Yeah, that became the running joke: is that Samuel was Helm's favorite, and the DM actually made it like lore.
Yeah,
that Samuel Helm loves him.
I love that.
And the reason that he told me that was going to end up coming out was because Helm was in love with this like goddess who died.
Mm-hmm.
And Samuel was his like Asamar celestial like ancestry was that goddess. Okay. And he was one of her only living descendants with like a spark of celestial power. And he was also entirely by cosmic chance or some twist of the fates or AO or some bullshit, a paladin of Helm. So Helm not only had power over him as a paladin and permission as a god to protect him as his paladin, but also a reason to like him that much because he was one of the last descendants of Helm's dead like girlfriend, essentially.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is like, it's kind of inhuman, but it's also kind of very human. And I liked it.
I like it too.
It's an interesting way to use a god.
Well, I will say that is where I'm going to cut it because of the fact that we basically started going off on tangents because we've covered most of the things that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
So thank you everyone who listened. If you're interested, check out any of the links below for more content. And other than that, I hope you all have a great day.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.